Welcome to Just Settled. We're so excited today to have Mike Bell, an amazing personal injury attorney from Birmingham, Alabama. Welcome, Mike. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here, Dan.
And I just want to dive right in, I guess. This case we were talking about was really an interesting one to me, and I think it's going to be a great episode here. Yeah, I just kind of want to get all the details. So how did you first learn about this specific case? I think you said it was a judgment, right? Judgment case. And what were your initial thoughts, I guess, when you first heard about it?
Right. So the case actually came out of the blue. We received a phone call about 2 years ago from the injured party, Miss Teresa Foster. She's in Jacksonville, Florida. She gave me a call. I believe it was on a Friday or a Saturday. And she said that she was referred to us by her cousin. Still to this day, I'm not exactly sure who her cousin is, but if you are her cousin, please give me a call so I can thank you.
Amazing. Okay. And so in terms of like the specifics of what she kind of described when she first told you about this case, I guess what were those, like, how did she present the case to you? And then when you learned about exactly what the details were, what were your initial, did you have any concerns or uncertainties about this outcome or how it might be, or did you initially know, like, oh, this is actually, there's a lot of meat here, this is a real case?
Right. So when I first spoke with her, Ms. Foster, she informed me that she had been shot here in Birmingham.
Wow.
She had been shot here at an event for a motorcycle club. They were having an anniversary party, and she was shot in the back.
Oh my God.
There was an altercation that ensued at the party. There was a block party. Patrons were, there in the middle of the street drinking. The streets were blocked off from end to end. So the fight ensues. Someone pulls a gun. Our client is running away from the scene, and she's shot in the back. She's instantly rendered paralyzed from the waist down. She spent 30 days in the hospital here, and then she was airlifted back to Jacksonville, Florida, and spent another 30 days in the hospital. When she woke up, the doctors informed her that she was paralyzed and that she would probably never walk again. 2 years later, 3 years removed from the incident, 2 years removed from when we first met her, she still has not regained her mobility. So right now, she is still confined to a bed. She's confined to a wheelchair. My first initial thoughts were you had a case that had severe catastrophic injuries.
Right.
The other thing that popped in my head was you had multiple defendants. And I mean multiple defendants because this organization is an international organization that has multiple chapters. The organization was headquartered or is headquartered in Chicago, Illinois. They had a local chapter here in Birmingham, and they have several dozen chapters across the United States as well as in other countries. Right. So you're dealing with a lot of moving parts when you're dealing with an entity that has different sub-entities.
Yeah, that is very interesting, and I'm sure not so straightforward to deal with. I can imagine the challenges that would arise with that. And it's horrible to hear that's what happened to her. I mean, it certainly is catastrophic. What were her expectations for restitution? And when you were first thinking of like what you could attempt to try to get for her in this judgment case to help with obviously medical bills and care for the rest of her life, what kind of amounts of, I guess, money were being even discussed for what the target was, I guess?
Right. So originally, she didn't even want to file suit against this organization because the organization was an organization that she was a member of. Oh. So she had been hesitant to even pursue litigation because she had emotional ties to the organization, to people in the organization. So she waited a year after she was injured to even consider pursuing any kind of legal action against the organization. And, to make it I would guess to hindsight for everybody is that I do believe that if The organization had just came to her because she was a fellow member and said, "Hey, what can we do to kind of ease your burden? Like, can we buy you a van to kind of get you in and out of your house?" To put it into perspective, she has to pay $150 every time she wants to leave her house just to get loaded into a vehicle to become mobile.
Right.
So you're talking about a daily expense of $150 just to get loaded into a van.
Yeah.
So right. So when we started talking to her about the prospects of recovering anything for her, of course, with catastrophic injuries, you're already looking at damages well over $1 million. The issue is, in cases like this, what are your sources of recovery? You've got to find out if entities like this have insurance, because most entities are not required to have insurance. Liability insurance is something that most reasonable business owners would have, but a lot of business owners are not required to have certain levels of liability insurance unless you're talking about commercial carriers, interstate travel, things like that. Then you see where there's a mandate that there has to be liability insurance. But a lot of these premises liability cases, negligent security cases, there's not necessarily a mandate on a lot of these entities or businesses to have liability insurance. So you got to figure out where's your recovery going to come from. So our game plan in this was to, number one, secure either a verdict or a judgment against this organization. The game plan number two was, if there is no insurance, to get the judgment, to get the verdict, and to collect on that whichever way we can. And that is basically go in, get our award, and kick the door in and start to seize assets for our injured client.
Right.
So, a lot of attorneys, I would say, if it's not cut and dry as to, or clear cut, whether there is insurance on the table, a lot of people will shy away from a case where they're unsure if they're ever going to get paid.
Yeah.
The way that we looked at this was, you have an injured person who, by all accounts, has no one else to turn to. And so for us in this, our ability to get paid was a lot less on the totem pole, a lot lower on the totem pole than just securing for this person who's been so tragically injured some form of consolation, some form of justice.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And I wouldn't have even thought about the insurance aspect of it. You're right. This entity wouldn't, the way you described it, I wouldn't imagine they would have insurance. So, and I guess that kind of dovetails into my next question. What was the opposition and obstacles you encountered in this case? Were they atypical? Like, were they more unique and kind of just singular and something that you hadn't come across before? Or were there more things about this case that ended up being like, this actually is aligning with other kinds of cases that I've dealt with like this? It sounds a little unique, honestly.
Well, I would think the biggest aspect of this case, unlike most cases, is that you had an unwillingness by the defendants to actually come to the table.
Okay.
In most cases, defendants are have some sense of responsibility, even if they offer something that might be paltry or doesn't match the level of injuries. At least they come to the table to start some form of negotiations or start some form of conversation as to how can we get past this.
Right.
This organization did none of that. Absolutely none of that. Their method, or what their idea was, or their game plan was to basically ignore us, as if our lawsuit and our complaint was going to go away.
Right.
And so we literally went a year with our complaint being unanswered.
Okay.
The judge in this case actually allowed them more time. And when we went to our hearings regarding this case, the judge even told them. The funny thing about it is that when we went to our first hearing, they told the judge that they talked to 8 attorneys, and 8 attorneys would not take the case.
Okay.
Well, Right. So 365 days had passed. And my response to that was, well, you had 365 days to contact 365 attorneys.
Yeah,
You could
exactly.
have contacted one attorney a day.
Yeah, or more.
So, right, exactly. Yeah. So when we got our judgment entered by the judge, that same day, they actually contracted or entered into in a retainer agreement, an engagement with a local attorney here in Birmingham on the same day that the judgment was entered.
Right.
So ironically, after having not found an attorney for 365 days, on the day that your judgment is entered, you find an attorney.
Right. Yeah. Right. So they were just obviously, like you said, they were avoiding and trying to hope that it was going to disappear, basically. Right. Can you sort of outline? Yeah, obviously you said this is great. Every question is like dovetailing into my next question, but you mentioned the 365 days. On top of that, like what was the total outline for the timeline of this case from start to finish? What did the timeline look like from that first call to when it was completed?
So from the first call, the case actually ended up before the Alabama State Supreme Court.
Oh, wow.
There was a writ of mandamus that was entered, well, that was motioned by the defense counsel in this case, basically to force the trial judge to release or vacate the judgment that she had entered. Mm-hmm. And literally three years to the day that our client was shot, the Alabama State Supreme Court dismissed the defense's writ of mandamus.
Okay.
3 years to the day that she was shot. And so that was kind of poignant for her and emotional, that 3 years to the day of her being injured, the Alabama State Supreme Court upheld her judgment. Mm-hmm. So 3 years removed, and then 2 years removed from the date that we actually started to talk to our client. Right. So 2 years worth of legal preparation, legal work, and actually holding our client's hand. So 2 years for us on that.
Okay. Yeah, some poetic justice there, right? That the same day that she got shot 3 years later. At what point, was there a point during that 3 years or 2 years, I guess, where you were specifically working with her, where you realized, again, this isn't a settlement, this ended up being a judgment, but I guess you were in court right, because you said Alabama Supreme Court. So this actually went through the whole court and trial process, right?
Right. So it went through several hearings. So we had several hearings in front of the trial judge. Mm-hmm. Once the judgment was entered, once the default was granted, that's when they wanted, the defendants wanted to try to come out the woodwork. So we had several hearings before the trial judge. There was a writ of mandamus that was motioned before the Alabama State Supreme Court. We anticipated that we may have had to provide an answer to their writ of mandamus with some kind of evidentiary findings to support our position to the Alabama State Supreme Court. But fortunately for our client and for us, we didn't have to go that far, because just a few days after the motion was entered, the dismissal of the motion was granted.
Okay. And when the momentum kind of kicked up towards the end, and you could probably sense that this was coming to some sort of conclusion through these hearings and everything, was there a negotiation process that was occurring? And obviously the defendant, the way you described it, I'm sure they were trying to minimize whatever they were paying. But how did you kind of advocate for your client in that part of the process, and how did that go?
So to add insult to injury, during our final hearing, there was a moment when defense counsel basically in open court said that, of course there was talk of trying to get them to come to some kind of position where they would offer a settlement. Mm-hmm. We never got to that point in communicating with defense counsel, because, the organization just was not hearing it. But in open court in our last hearing, which was the hearing for damages to award an actual amount, defense counsel for the organization basically offered in open court a settlement of $5,000.
Oh my
$5,000 to compensate our paralyzed client. My response to that was, you cannot give a paltry settlement when there are catastrophic injuries on the table. His words were to basically enter a minimal judgment, enter a minimal award. A minimal award cannot compensate when you have major catastrophic injuries.
Yeah. So what? Yeah, I mean, $5,000. You said $150 a day to go in and out of the van. That's 1 month of just that one thing. It's nothing. I mean, what was the final outcome of this judgment? And how did it positively impact your client and her, life moving forward? Was there what was the amount that ended up being granted to her from this case?
Right. So after our client gave testimony as to her injuries and as to how her life had changed on a day-to-day basis, the judge basically ruled in our favor and awarded $4.2 million to our client.
Yeah.
So we went from a $5,000 open court offer to a $4.2 million award of damages to our paralyzed client, which means, now you said, how does that change her life? Number one, when we explained to her what had happened, because she wasn't in court, we had to call her she gave testimony via phone.
Right.
And then when we got the award amount, we called her up and told her, what had happened. And she said finally, 3 years later, she was finally able to breathe.
Right.
For 3 years, this has been hanging over her head. So now she's able to breathe, but our work is not done, because now we're in the post-judgment phase, in which we're submitting post-judgment discovery interrogatories and requests for production. And then we'll be doing post-discovery depositions with the leadership of the organization in order to identify assets and where those assets are. After we do that, we will then be domesticating our judgment in Illinois, as well as executing on our judgment here in Alabama. Wow. And what that means is kicking down the door and seizing assets.
Yeah. Wow. That is a very interesting and wild ride of a case. And thank you for sharing that with us. It was, amazing work, first of all. And I'm sure your client is lucky that she found you. But yeah, this is a very interesting one. Thank you for telling us this story today, Mike, and sharing this with us on Just Settled.
Well, thank you. And we are blessed to have each and every one of our clients. And we're definitely blessed that we were able to help Ms. Foster.